At Little Monster, we talk a lot about thumbnails, and with good reason. They are one of the most important parts of your video, and I'm including the video part. I know what the common phrase is, but it turns out that you can and do judge a book by its cover. I mean, have you ever bought a book? Of course you judge it by the cover. The cover helps tell you what's in the book. Like when I was little, if a book had a dragon on it, I was probably going to enjoy it because it had a dragon on it. As an older, more refined reader, I prefer that the book cover have 2 dragons on it. But seriously, thumbnails are what convince people to watch your video in the first place. It needs to be good, and that's why we have a service that's devoted to just thumbnails. Monster Thumbnails. If you're someone that feels that you have trouble with thumbnails and you're not sure how to get them and you want to get your CTR up, hit us up because we like doing thumbnails, we like talking about thumbnails, Monster Thumbnails. Okay, so that's why CTR and thumbnails are important, so let's get into how to read them. Because CTR, as it turns out, is one of the more complicated metrics on YouTube, which is just such a great combination to have the thing that's maybe the most important metric also be one of the most complicated. Because a lot of metrics on YouTube are absolute. The number of views you have is pretty absolute. Your average view duration, pretty absolute. CTR is super duper relative, not just to like your niche or your vertical, but within your own channel. This makes raw comparison really hard. Like if you have a friend and you go to their channel and they have a different CTR than yours, that doesn't necessarily tell you anything. As a quick example of this, kids' channels have typically very high CTR. When I'm working with kids' channels, it's not unusual at all to have 10% or higher CTR. Heck, it's not unusual to have like 17 or 18% CTR on kids' content. And if you've worked in adult content for a long time, you might be willing to kill someone for 18% CTR. Don't kill someone for 18% CTR. The whole point is that it's relative. You gotta evaluate things in a relative sense. And then on the channel side, CTR is relative within your own videos. Because CTR as a metric on its own doesn't tell us a lot, we have to compare it against our impressions. In case you didn't know, impressions are basically how many people saw your thumbnail, whether or not they chose to click on it. It's the number of people that YouTube recommended your content to, whether it was on the homepage or suggested or it came up in search. If your impressions are really, really high, it means that your video was shown to a pretty wide audience. If your impressions are low, it means your video was shown to a much narrower, more niche audience. As you might imagine, the wider your audience, the lower your CTR is going to be. Let's give a real quick example of this. If you've been watching my videos, well, if you've been watching my videos, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You might have noticed that I like Pokemon and like making references to Pokemon. So like if I were to go to a gaming convention and just show up and say, Charizard is overrated trash, chances are good that a lot of people would react to that. Whether that's a ridiculous negative reaction or a positive correct reaction, entirely different story. In this instance, we're talking about a niche audience. My comment exists around a narrow set of people that are predisposed to caring about it. On the other hand, what if I could broadcast my statement to all 7 billion people on planet Earth? By percentage, it is essentially guaranteed that a much lower percentage of people would have an emotional response. There's just gonna be a lot more people that do not care about Pokemon. But we're also talking about an audience of 7 billion people. The total number of people who would have an emotional reaction is, by absolute value, much higher. This is what happens to CTR. I have a very narrow audience predisposed to reacting to my content. In the second example, it's a much wider audience. They're not going to react as much. This generally holds true, and you'll tend to see an inverse relationship between CTR and impressions. The higher impressions go, the lower CTR goes. If you ever wind up with a video in trending, you will find out very quickly that trending is basically CTR poison. Because now your video is being shown to basically everyone that logs onto the platform, regardless of their niche, and chances are a ton of those people just don't care. Your impressions will be super duper high, and a bunch of those people won't click on it. And like, look, that can be okay because a really, really high number of impressions still means that a lot of people saw your video. And those that did choose to click on it and watched it all the way through are much more likely to be served your next video. Okay, so CTR is all relative. That's all well and good. Whoop-de-doo. How do we evaluate it then? The short answer is that we're going to evaluate CTR at a lot of different points rather than taking it as just one number. Because we want our audience to grow and because we want it to expand, we're typically looking for a wider audience, which means we do want impressions to be pretty high. Okay, that's all well and good. CTR and impressions are relative metrics. High impressions is good because it means that we have a higher audience, even as it means we have lower CTR. Okay, so how do we get that wider audience? And those high impressions can mean that our audience is growing. So how do we get higher impressions? And this is where it gets really, really frustrating because the answer is good CTR. Oh boy. Let's get into this. So when I upload a video on day one, it's primarily going to be shown to people who have watched one of my videos recently. By YouTube's reckoning, they're an easy answer for who's likely to be interested in your video. And let's say this video really resonated with those people. It's going to have a really high CTR on day one. Day one CTR is super duper important for this reason. If day one CTR isn't something that you've looked at before, go to some of your recent videos, look at what CTR was on day one and day one only. Try and get a sense of where it is on day one. Depending on your audience, it might be lower than the average for the video, or it might be higher than the average for the video. Whether it's higher or lower than the average generally, I want you to take an average of where that day one CTR tends to be. Like sure, maybe across all your videos, the average CTR is 5%, but maybe on day one, it's actually 6%, or maybe it's 4%. Now, when you have a new video, compare the day one CTR to that average day one CTR. Once your video is shown to more people, YouTube's going to do the same thing again. If that CTR is really high amongst your niche, YouTube will want to show it to a wider audience and see if they can't repeat the success. If CTR continues to be really high with this slightly wider audience, they're going to widen the net again and again and again and again until your CTR starts to dwindle. This is how we see growth happen on the platform, and this is why thumbnails are so important. They're the biggest determinant of whether or not you click on a video. And whether or not you click on a video and then watch it is really important to YouTube showing it to other people like you. If your day one CTR is really low in your niche, YouTube's going to say, hey, this video didn't really seem to do well with this video's audience, so let's not waste space recommending it to a wider set of people who are much less likely to click on it. So that's the first important thing about evaluating CTR. Get a sense of what your day one CTR tends to be, and then look at your videos as they're being uploaded to see how they compare to that average day one CTR. If it's higher, you're golden. Your video's probably gonna do very well compared to how your videos normally do. If it's doing lower than average, might be time to change the thumbnail. If you have a plan B thumbnail, this might be the time to change it because these first few hours are super duper critical. And if your video is not doing well in the first 24 hours, it's very unlikely to do well later in its life. It happens, it's not likely. That being said, it can be really hard in like the first hour to tell how a video is doing. So you'll want to give it some time, and you'll want to pay attention to how videos do as they're being uploaded. The more you watch your videos being uploaded in the moment, the better sense you'll have of whether or not a video is doing particularly well or poorly at the start. So that covers how to look at CTR for new uploads. What if I want to look back? What if I want to see what my best thumbnails ever are? If you're looking for your best thumbnails ever, go into YouTube Analytics and take a long range of time. Say, look at the past 90 days or even the past year. Sort your videos by number of impressions and look at the highest impression videos that you have. From there, I try and look for videos that are above average CTR while still having really high impressions, because these are videos that were shown to some of the widest audiences your videos ever had and still did above your average CTR. These tend to be really big winners. And if you're looking for trends in your thumbnails, this is a good place to start looking. Now, at this point, you might be asking, so what, is my channel CTR just totally completely useless? And the answer is no, of course not. Your channel-wide average CTR is really good for looking for trends over time. The best way to use this metric is to, again, take a long range of time, say 90 days. This is a metric that's really helpful if you do something like change up your thumbnail strategy, which maybe you want to do with Monster Thumbnail. We do channel overhauls, which is something you maybe want to do with Monster Thumbnails. I don't know, just thought. So if I make a big change to a bunch of my thumbnails, I'm going to mark that point in time and I'm going to evaluate CTR before and after those changes and see if there's a significant difference. And of course, I'm going to compare this to the number of impressions that I get. Because let's say my CTR has been a constant 5%, but my impressions have doubled. That's a good sign that my new thumbnails are doing really well. So as a quick summary, when you're looking at individual videos, focus especially on day one CTR. This is going to be super important to the health of your video over its life. If you're looking for the best thumbnails on your channel, sort by impressions, look for videos with an above average CTR. And the best way to use your channel average CTR is to look at it over time and monitor it within the context of different changes that you've made. And with that, you should be much better at evaluating thumbnails. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to check out these other great videos on audience development. Be sure to click the thumbs up to let us know that you enjoyed it and that you'd like to see more like it. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Little Monster for more videos on audience development every week. See you next time.